Tony Gallagher and Connor Dempsey ruled Liverpool's streets in silence and terror. But when betrayal and bloodshed tore their empires apart, the city itself became a battlefield where loyalty meant nothing and survival was the only law. In the early 1990s, Liverpool was a city divided between hope and hardship. The docks that once powered Britain's trade stood silent, their cranes frozen like forgotten monuments to better days. Streets once filled with shipbuilders and traders were now home to unemployed men, restless teenagers, and families struggling to survive. Amid this decay, an opportunity was waiting, not for the honest, but for the ambitious and the ruthless. It was here that Tony Gallagher saw his chance to build an empire. A former dock worker with sharp instincts and cold determination, Gallagher knew the port's secrets better than anyone. He understood how goods flowed in and out, how containers could vanish without a trace, and how to make money where others saw ruin. What began as small-time theft soon evolved into organized smuggling. Gallagher and a few loyal friends started stealing electronics, cigarettes and alcohol from containers, selling them through underground markets across Merseyside. The profits came fast, but Gallagher's mind was fixed on something bigger. He wanted to control the city's criminal economy, to turn Liverpool into the gateway for something far more profitable: drugs. The first major shipment arrived hidden inside crates of frozen fish from South America. It was a risky move, but Gallagher had connections in the right places. A corrupt customs officer ensured the containers passed inspection without question. The cocaine inside was pure, powerful, and worth millions. When the deal succeeded, Gallagher knew his life had changed forever. He reinvested every pound, buying loyalty, weapons, and silence. Within a year, his operation expanded to include dealers across Merseyside, all working under his command. He became known by a name whispered in fear and respect: the Dock King. He dressed like a businessman, and spoke like one too, but behind the calm smile was a man willing to kill to protect his empire. Gallagher's reach extended across borders. He built alliances with Dutch suppliers and Irish smugglers, moving drugs from Amsterdam to Dublin, and from there to Liverpool's hidden warehouses. Every week, shipments arrived and disappeared before the police even knew they existed. The money flooded in so fast it was hard to hide. Gallagher opened bars, nightclubs, and used car lots, all under fake ownership. To the public, he was a successful entrepreneur. To the streets, he was a legend. But power always demands blood. Rivals began to appear, drawn by the fortune Gallagher was building. Fights broke out in pubs, warehouses were burned, and informants were silenced. Gallagher responded with brutal precision, using fear as his weapon. No one crossed him twice. His lieutenants, handpicked from Liverpool's toughest estates, enforced his rules with loyalty and violence. By the end of the decade, Gallagher controlled the docks, the drugs, and the streets. Liverpool had found its king, but his throne was built on secrets, betrayal, and blood. The police knew something dangerous was growing in the shadows, yet no one could touch him. Gallagher was untouchable, invisible, and always one step ahead. What no one knew then was that his empire, born from the ruins of a broken city, would soon drag Liverpool into one of the darkest chapters in British criminal history. By the mid-1990s, Tony Gallagher's grip on Liverpool's criminal world was absolute. His men controlled the docks, the streets, and the flow of drugs through the city. For a while it seemed nothing could threaten his empire. But power never lasts without enemies, and in the shadows others were plotting. The Murphy brothers, a trio of hardened gangsters from Toxteth, had grown tired of Gallagher's dominance. They wanted a share of the lucrative trade and believed they could muscle in on his territory. The Murphys were reckless, unpredictable, and hungry for control. Their attempt to challenge Gallagher would ignite a bloody war that turned Liverpool's underworld into a battlefield. It started with a robbery. One of Gallagher's shipments vanished from the docks. Millions of pounds worth of cocaine gone without a trace. At first, Gallagher thought it was a mistake, maybe a customs intervention. But when whispers reached him that the Murphys had been celebrating their sudden wealth, he knew the truth. Retaliation was swift. Within days, one of the Murphy brothers' warehouses went up in flames. the fire lighting up the night sky over Merseyside. It was Gallagher's warning, a message written in smoke and ash. The Murphys refused to back down. They struck back with gunfire, targeting one of Gallagher's senior men outside a nightclub in Bootle. The man didn't survive. It was now open war. The violence spiraled quickly, spreading fear across the city. Drive-by shootings, car bombings, and disappearances became common. The streets of Liverpool turned into a silent war zone, with ordinary people trapped in the crossfire. The police struggled to contain the chaos, launching a massive crackdown dubbed Operation Tide, but they were always 2 steps behind. Gallagher's influence ran deep, and he had friends in places meant to stop him. Every raid, every planned arrest, seemed to fail before it even began. Then came the moment that cemented Gallagher's reputation as the most feared man in Liverpool. The youngest Murphy brother, Danny, was found floating in the River Mersey. Chains weighed his body down, but the message was clear. Gallagher was sending a warning to anyone who dared challenge him. The murder terrified the underworld. The remaining Murphy brothers fled to Spain, disappearing overnight, leaving their men scattered and demoralized. Gallagher had won the war, but the cost was high. His empire was stronger than ever. Yet blood had soaked its foundation. For the people of Liverpool, the violence left scars that wouldn't fade. Fear ruled the streets, and no one spoke openly about what was happening. Businesses paid protection fees to Gallagher's men, and anyone who refused simply disappeared. The police intensified their operations, determined to take him down, but Gallagher's network of informants kept him untouchable. He knew when to vanish, when to move shipments, and when to silence a threat. By the late 1990s, Gallagher had transformed from a smuggler into something far more dangerous, a criminal warlord. He ruled the docks through fear and loyalty, his enemies buried beneath the waters of the Mersey. But as the city tried to heal from the bloodshed, a darker truth began to emerge. Power, once taken, always invites betrayal. And for Gallagher, the next threat would not come from the streets, it would rise from within his own empire. By the early 2000s, Tony Gallagher's empire was operating like a well-oiled machine. The chaos of the past years had settled, and in its place stood a criminal network that reached from Liverpool's docklands to the shores of Spain. Gallagher no longer needed to get his hands dirty. He had lieutenants, accountants, and loyal enforcers running his operations, while he played the part of a legitimate businessman. His pubs, car dealerships, and construction companies were fronts for one of the most sophisticated money laundering schemes in the country. Every brick, every pint poured, and every car sold hid the flow of millions in drug money. Gallagher had become more cautious, but also more powerful. His men imported cocaine through the docks using legitimate shipping manifests, hiding the drugs inside machinery, frozen goods, or hidden compartments of cargo containers. The scale was staggering, dozens of shipments every month, and hardly any intercepted. He built secret storage units across Merseyside and used couriers to distribute the drugs across the UK. His network wasn't just about money, it was about control. Dealers who worked for him were bound by fear, loyalty, and debt. Anyone who tried to break away faced brutal consequences. Gallagher's rule was silent but absolute. The wealth transformed him. He moved his family into a secluded mansion outside the city, far from the streets that had made him rich. He began investing in overseas properties and built ties with Spanish and Dutch traffickers. Liverpool became the central hub for his European supply line. A port city once famous for trade, now known quietly as the entry point for Britain's cocaine market. Gallagher was smart enough to avoid public attention. He dressed modestly, avoided flashy cars, and donated to local charities to polish his image. Yet those who knew him understood the truth. Behind his calm exterior was a man who would destroy anyone threatening his empire. His closest associates were men like Paul the Fixer Naylor and Liam Hunt, both former small-time criminals who owed their success to Gallagher. Naylor handled the finances and bribes, keeping the books clean and the police distracted. Hunt oversaw enforcement, ensuring that discipline within the ranks never wavered. Together, they formed the backbone of the network, a criminal structure as organized as any corporation. But with great power came darker ambitions. Rumors spread of missing couriers, dealers who had skimmed profits and were never seen again. Some said there was a remote patch of woodland near Sefton, where the network buried its secrets, a place no one dared to visit. Despite whispers of corruption, Gallagher's empire seemed unstoppable. The police continued their investigations, but informants disappeared before they could testify. Witnesses recanted, and juries were intimidated. Gallagher had created a system of fear that even law enforcement couldn't penetrate. For ordinary Liverpudlians, his influence was invisible but everywhere, in the pubs, the nightclubs, even the construction sites rising across the city. To most, he was untouchable, a ghost controlling the streets from the shadows. But as with every empire built on greed, cracks were beginning to form beneath the surface. Gallagher didn't know it yet, but betrayal was already taking root among the people he trusted most. The network's foundation, so carefully constructed, was beginning to shake, and when it broke, it would tear Liverpool's underworld apart. By 2008, Tony Gallagher's empire looked unshakable from the outside. He had had wars, police raids, and betrayals, emerging wealthier and more feared than ever. But inside the network, tension was building. Years of paranoia and greed had eroded the loyalty that once bound his men together. Gallagher had grown older and more cautious, spending less time on the streets and more behind layers of protection. For some of his lieutenants, especially Paul the Fixer Naylor, that caution looked like weakness. Naylor had built much of Gallagher's success. He managed the money, the bribes, and the logistics, but he wanted more. He saw himself as the true brain behind the operation, and believed Gallagher no longer had the nerve to lead. Quietly, he began to make moves of his own, cutting secret deals and pocketing profits. At first, Gallagher didn't notice. He trusted Naylor more than anyone, relying on him to keep the operation running smoothly. But whispers started to reach him from the streets, rumors of shipments being redirected, of money vanishing without explanation. Gallagher's instincts told him something was wrong. He ordered a quiet investigation, following the money trail that led directly to Naylor. When the truth came out, Gallagher was furious. To him, betrayal was worse than any police threat. He planned to deal with it the way he always had, quietly and permanently. But Naylor was one step ahead. On a stormy night in early winter, Gallagher's convoy was ambushed on a deserted road near the docks. The attackers came out of nowhere, armed and precise. Bullets ripped through the darkness, shattering the calm. Gallagher's driver died instantly, and two of his guards barely escaped. Gallagher himself was hit but survived by luck, dragged from the wreckage by one of his loyal men. The city woke the next morning to the news that the Dock King had been attacked, and speculation spread like wildfire. Some blamed rival gangs, others thought it was a message from abroad, but those closest to the truth knew it was an inside job. The attack marked the beginning of the end. The network split into two, those still loyal to Gallagher and those vasing with Naylor, who declared himself the rightful heir to the empire. What followed was chaos. Drug routes were disrupted, safe houses raided, and trusted lieutenants turned against each other. Shootings erupted across Liverpool, from Bootle to Enfield. Ordinary people learned to stay indoors after dark, knowing the city had become a war zone again. Gallagher, weakened but determined, struck back with brutal precision. Naylor's associates started disappearing one by one. Bodies turned up in canals, alleyways, and burned-out cars. The old rules of silence and loyalty were gone. It was now a war of survival. For Gallagher, it was about more than money. It was about reclaiming his crown. But every victory came with new enemies, and every act of revenge drew more police attention. By the end of the year, the once unified network was collapsing. Gallagher's paranoia consumed him, forcing him deeper into hiding. Naylor, meanwhile, tightened his control over what was left of the organization, presenting himself as a modern boss who would rebuild Liverpool's criminal world in his image. What neither man realized was that the bloodshed had attracted more attention than ever before. The authorities were closing in, and both Gallagher and Naylor were too blinded by vengeance to see it. The empire that once ruled Liverpool's streets was beginning to crumble from within, eaten alive by betrayal, greed, and the ghosts of loyalty long forgotten. By 2010, the Liverpool underworld had changed beyond recognition. The old rules of loyalty and respect that once kept order were gone, replaced by chaos and ambition. The city's criminal network had splintered after the war between Tony Gallagher and Paul Naylor, leaving a vacuum that younger, more ruthless men were eager to fill. Among them was Connor Dempsey, a name that would soon become synonymous with violence and power. Born and raised in one of Liverpool's roughest estates, Dempsey grew up idolizing the stories of Gallagher's reign. As a teenager, he had been a low-level runner for the network, delivering drugs and collecting payments. But Dempsey wasn't content to stay small. He watched, listened, and learned how the business worked. When the empire fractured, he saw his chance to take control. Dempsey was different from the old generation. He didn't rely on intimidation alone. He understood technology, money laundering, and international communication. He used encrypted phones, offshore accounts, and cryptocurrencies to move millions across borders without leaving a trace. He built alliances with cartels in Spain and suppliers in Eastern Europe, re-establishing Liverpool as one of the UK's primary entry points for cocaine. Dempsey was young, bold, and ruthless, but what made him truly dangerous was his unpredictability. He didn't fear anyone. Not the police, not rival gangs, and certainly not the aging remnants of Gallagher's empire. His rise was swift and brutal. Dempsey started by eliminating small-time dealers who refused to join him. He replaced them with loyal followers, young men willing to do anything for money and power. Within months, Dempsey controlled entire estates, using violence as his language. Drive-by shootings and daylight assassinations became part of daily life. It wasn't business anymore. It was war. The police described him as part of a new breed of criminal, organized, connected, and nearly impossible to track. He flaunted his wealth online, posing with designer watches, luxury cars, and coded messages that mocked the authorities. His reputation grew so quickly that even Gallagher, watching from the shadows, couldn't ignore him. Gallagher, recovering from years of conflict, attempted to reach out through intermediaries. He wanted peace, a truce that would keep both sides profitable, and avoid attracting too much attention. But Dempsey wasn't interested in compromise. He saw Gallagher as a relic, a man clinging to a dying legacy. When Gallagher's men tried to broker talks, Dempsey sent back a silent message, a shipment burned to ash and left at the docks. To him there was no room for the old guard. It was his city now. The violence that followed was unlike anything Liverpool had seen before. Dempsey's gang operated like a paramilitary force, striking fast and disappearing before police could respond. Streets once ruled by fear of Gallagher now belonged to Dempsey, whose influence stretched beyond the city and into neighboring regions. Yet with every step he took, his ambition drew more attention from law enforcement. The National Crime Agency began mapping his connections, tracking encrypted messages and tracing financial trails. Still, Dempsey remained untouchable, protected by layers of loyalty and fear. For Liverpool, it was a new era of blood and power. One led not by men who remembered the old ways, but by a generation raised on violence, greed, and the promise of digital anonymity. Gallagher had built an empire through cunning and discipline. Dempsey was building his through terror. And in the dark corners of the city, whispers began to grow that something bigger was coming, something that would bring both men, old and new, to their knees. In 2013, Liverpool's underworld was gripped by fear and confusion. For the first time in years, it wasn't a rival gang or police raid causing the panic, it was a ghost. Someone within the criminal network had started feeding information to the National Crime Agency, leaking details about drug shipments, safe houses, and money laundering routes. The informant was known only by one name, Echo. No one knew who Echo was, but their information was precise, devastating, and deadly for those it exposed. One by one, Gallagher's remaining lieutenants and Dempsey's newly rising enforcers were arrested in coordinated raids. Drugs worth millions were seized, and several of the network's secret stash houses were uncovered in a matter of weeks. It was as if someone had a map of every hidden corner of Liverpool's underworld. The paranoia spread like a virus. Gallagher, still operating quietly after surviving years of war, became obsessed with finding the traitor. Dempsey, who had risen to near total control of the city's drug trade, grew equally paranoid. He believed Gallagher's people were working with the authorities to destroy him. Both sides launched their own internal purges. Suspected informants were dragged into warehouses, tortured for information, and never seen again. But the leaks didn't stop. Each new arrest drove both men deeper into suspicion and isolation. The streets grew quieter, but the tension underneath was suffocating. Then came a series of coordinated police operations across Merseyside, Manchester, and Spain. Dozens of arrests, millions seized, and several of Dempsey's closest partners captured in a single night. The scale of it stunned even veteran officers. Someone on the inside was feeding the police everything. The criminal world was in chaos. Gallagher's once loyal inner circle turned against each other, and Dempsey's men began fleeing the country. Liverpool's criminal empire, once untouchable, was imploding from within. Weeks later, the truth surfaced, and it shocked everyone. Echo was none other than Paul, the fixer Naylor, the same man who had once betrayed Gallagher years earlier and vanished after the ambush that nearly killed him. Naylor had faked his own death, fled abroad, and lived under a false identity. But rather than disappearing forever, he had struck a deal with the authorities. In exchange for immunity and protection, Naylor provided years' worth of inside knowledge, detailed routes, offshore accounts, coded communications, and the hierarchy of the Liverpool underworld. Every move he made was designed to bring down both Gallagher and Dempsey, the two men who had left him for dead. When Gallagher learned the truth, he was said to have smashed everything in reach, screaming that the network had been poisoned from its core. Dempsey, furious and humiliated, swore revenge, but he couldn't strike back. The police now had everything they needed to dismantle his empire. Naylor had exposed not just individual crimes but the entire structure of how Liverpool's Mafia operated, from suppliers in Spain to couriers in the UK. By the end of the year, Gallagher's operations were crippled. Dempsey's network was in disarray, informants turned on one another, and the old codes of silence were broken forever. The streets that once belonged to the Dock King and his successors were now under constant surveillance, every deal a potential trap. The empire that had ruled Liverpool for 2 decades was rotting from the inside, undone not by violence but by betrayal. Echo had achieved what no rival or police unit ever could. He had made the untouchable finally fall within reach. Even after Tony Gallagher's imprisonment and the collapse of his once mighty network, Liverpool's streets were far from peaceful. The power vacuum left by his downfall had been quickly filled by younger, more ruthless gangs, eager to stake their claim in the city's criminal underworld. The rules that once governed loyalty, territory, and silence had been broken, replaced by a new era where technology and terror dictated control. Encrypted phones, social media communications, and cryptocurrency transactions made law enforcement's job increasingly difficult. The docks remained the heart of the trade, but the faces had changed, and the game had evolved. Connor Dempsey, who had survived the police crackdown and outmaneuvered rivals, had established himself as the dominant force. His network extended far beyond Liverpool, connecting with international suppliers and using advanced methods to smuggle drugs and launder money. Dempsey's reputation was built not just on violence, but on cunning. He understood the world had changed, and he adapted faster than anyone. Ordinary citizens rarely saw him, yet the fear he inspired was palpable. Dealings were conducted in shadows, and whispers of his actions traveled faster than any police report. Violence was still a tool, but fear, manipulation, and digital sophistication were now his weapons of choice. Despite the apparent order Dempsey maintained, the streets of Liverpool were unstable. Smaller gangs fought for turf, desperate to survive or carve out their own piece of the empire. Shootings, kidnappings, and drug-fueled violence became commonplace. The city had learned to adapt to the chaos, neighbors whispered, avoided certain areas at night, and passed along rumors of imminent danger. Liverpool's underworld had become a self-sustaining cycle of fear and control, where power was constantly tested. Alliances were fragile, and betrayal could come from any corner. Even the authorities acknowledged the scale of the challenge. While Gallagher had been a single figure, untouchable yet centralized, the new underworld was fragmented and mobile. Investigators described it as a hydra, cut off one head, and several more appeared, sometimes stronger than before. Every raid or seizure disrupted one faction, but left others ready to capitalize. Liverpool's criminal network had become more than a local problem. It was a sophisticated machine with global links, capable of moving drugs, money, and weapons with alarming efficiency. Gallagher's legacy lingered. The stories of his rise, his violence, and his ultimate downfall were still told in hushed tones, serving as both legend and warning. Some said he continued to pull strings from prison, maintaining influence over old allies and watching the new generation with a calculating eye. Others claimed his downfall had taught the younger gangs everything they needed to know about ambition, fear, and the price of betrayal. For Liverpool, the lessons of the past remained vivid. Power was temporary, loyalty fragile, and violence inevitable. The docks, the warehouses, and the hidden corners of the city that had once belonged to Gallagher now belonged to no one and everyone at once. The Liverpool Mafia, in its new form, was not a single empire but a network of shadows, constantly shifting and evolving. The danger was no longer concentrated in one man or one gang. It was woven into the fabric of the city itself. Even today, under the surface of normal life, the streets of Liverpool hum with the quiet tension of unseen forces. The docks still conceal secrets, abandoned warehouses hide deals, and alleys are marked by the invisible footprints of crime. The empire may have changed, its leaders come and gone, but the city has learned one truth. In Liverpool, the mafia never truly disappears. It only adapts, waiting for the right moment to strike again. The shadow of the past lingers, a constant reminder that power may fade, but danger is eternal.